In this episode of Motive Tech, we take a first look at the new Garrett Advancing Motion G45 turbocharger. Now, if you've been watching our channel for a while, you will know that we've been around and driven hundreds of different turbo combinations, but we use Garrett Advancing Motion turbochargers on our project cars. And now we're very excited to announce the latest addition to the G series range, the G45 turbocharger. Now, the previous release was the G30 and G35 series that we also did a video about. And when we got hold of the first G35050 and put it onto our GTR, we were certainly not disappointed. It made nearly 900 horsepower at the hubs and was super drivable on a built 2.6 that revved to 9,500 RPM. Now, by perfect coincidence, the G45 has come out just in time to go onto our new 3.2 litre stroker RB3026 going into our R32 GTR. And I've been very excited about the release of this turbocharger for one fundamental reason, and that is the size of the rear turbine wheel in comparison to the front compressor wheel. Now, old school thinking with turbochargers was always have a nice big compressor that can flow heaps of air, but then have a small turbine wheel so that it stays responsive. Now, that was sort of true back in the day on moderate boost levels and normal petrol, but now modern performance engines being built have big boost, big RPM, and they use E85. So there is a lot more exhaust gas that needs to flow through the turbocharger, and in fact, those small turbine housings and turbine wheels have now become a restriction or choke the engine, and now the requirements for turbocharger sizing are very different. Now we actually want a larger rear wheel and housing compared to the front than what we used to the point where a lot of turbochargers you see that are very popular right now in the market actually have a larger rear wheel on the number than on the front. Now what they're comparing is the inducer of the compressor wheel to the exducer of the turbine wheel. So you've heard numbers like 6870, 6466, 7685, 8285, etc. And a lot of people have been saying to Garrett for a long time now, can you please make some turbochargers that have larger rear wheels to suit high boost, high RPM performance engine applications? And Garrett have answered the call with this, the new G45 range of turbochargers. There are 3 turbochargers in the G45 range. When we have a look at the number designation, we know that G stands for G series. The 45 correlates to the turbine wheel sizing, and on the G45 it is an 89mm inducer and an 82mm exducer, and that's the main number that people talk about when it comes to turbo sizing. The second number is the power rating of the compressor wheel, the 1125, the 1350 and 1500 horsepower ratings, which is obviously engine horsepower. And in terms of sizing, it is a 67mm inducer, a 72mm inducer, and then a 76mm inducer for the 1500 horsepower G45. So if you want to talk about that in more of a, I guess, wheel size way, you could call this a 6782, a 7282, and then a 7682. Now these numbers is what excites me so much about this turbo, because now you can see that the turbocharger sizing is very comparable to another very popular turbocharger. Like all G series turbos, it is a clean sheet design and uses new advanced aerodynamics on both the compressor and turbine wheel. The billet compressor wheel combined with Inconel turbine wheel means the rotating assembly is lighter for better response while also being more durable. The lightweight backing plate also helps lower the overall weight of the turbocharger. The center cartridge uses dual ceramic ball bearings with cages, and it also comes with water fittings. The compressor cover has an integrated pressure port and speed sensor. The G45 comes in 3 sizes. The G45 1125, which has a 67mm inducer and a 102mm exducer, the G45 1350, which has a 72mm inducer and 102mm exducer. And then the big daddy is the G45 1500 with 76mm inducer and 109mm exducer. All of them use the same turbine wheel with an 89mm inducer and 82mm exducer that can flow up to 56 pounds per minute in its largest rear housing size. Now, all of those stats are great on paper, but it's when you start to do some comparisons that they get even more impressive. And the most logical comparison is the G45 versus the GTX45. And the first thing you notice is visually, the G45 is, well, quite a bit smaller. You see straight away there's a 6-inch intake on the GTX45 and a 5-inch intake on the G45, and overall the compressor cover is around 50mm bigger on the GTX45. Now, if we pull off the compressor cover, one thing that I found quite interesting about it is check out the size of the GTX45 and then the G45. The flange of the G45 actually fits inside, and you can see there's quite a fair bit of difference in physical dimensions. Now, why is that a big deal? Well, when you want it to fit in your engine bay, obviously. On the turbine side, the G45 uses a 9-blade design versus the 12-blade design of the GTX45. Now, the thing about the GTX range is they still use the same rear wheel and rear housing as the original GT design. So as you can imagine, they're fairly old in design. And that's one of the great things about the G series range is it's a whole blank sheet design from scratch. Now, you can see with your own eyes the difference and how much more easily the exhaust gas would flow through the G45 turbine wheel. Looking at the official numbers, that shows through as the G45 flows 53 pounds per minute with a 1.28 rear housing versus only 46 pounds per minute for the GTX45. That's a massive increase for a wheel that is only 2mm bigger and is also lighter. On the compressor side, the GTX45 is an 80mm inducer and 108mm exducer and rated to 1250 horsepower, while in the G45 range, there is a 72mm inducer with 102mm exducer to get a rating of 1350 horsepower, so smaller with more power. While the largest G45 is a 76mm inducer with 109mm exducer to be rated at 250 more horsepower than the GTX45. Now let's take a look at the compressor maps, and you can see that the G45 1500 is able to work at higher boost levels, approaching 5 on the pressure ratio, rather than struggling to hit 4.5. Basically, it will be much happier at higher boost levels, and you can see there is plenty of efficiency at 120 pounds per minute of airflow, while the GTX45 is right on the choke line and inefficient at that flow. They are similar at around a pressure ratio of 3.5 and 100 pounds per minute flow rate, but who buys a G45 to only push 30 psi? Not us or anyone that we know. Now, all of those statistics are very impressive to compare, and the last thing that we compared was the overall weight of the turbochargers, with the G45 being 4 kilograms lighter than the GTX45 at 17 kilos and 21 kilos. Now, how does the G45 compare to some other turbocharger options? Well, the G42 has been very popular since it came out, and the largest turbo in that range has got a 1450 horsepower rating, which is only 50 horsepower less than the biggest G45. Now, the G42 and the G45 actually share the same physical dimensions for the compressor housing and the turbine housing. However, as we've already seen from the numbers and we're about to compare further, the G45 is very different to the G42, which makes me believe it's going to perform very differently in the real world. The compressor wheel on the G42 is a 79mm inducer to a 98mm exducer, so the inducer is actually larger than the G45 1500, but the exducer is 11mm smaller. So sometimes on paper, the G42 actually looks bigger, going off just the inducer size. Now, it's on the turbine size where the two turbos vary massively. The G42 range has an 82mm inducer and 75mm exducer, while the G45 has an 89mm inducer and an 82mm exducer. That's a massive 7mm difference. Now, in terms of turbine flow, you're talking only 42 pounds for a G42 versus a minimum of 50 pounds for the G45. Now, that is a huge difference in flow for the turbine wheel and housing on the G45. And my prediction is that the G45 in the real world will work much better than a G42 on a high RPM, high boost application such as on an RB or a JZ build. So with a higher flowing rear wheel and higher flowing rear housing, I think the G45 is going to be a winner. Now, what else can we compare the G45 to? Well, we can't really look at other brands because the equivalent brand from a competitor doesn't come with any compressor map data. So the only comparisons we'll be able to do is once it's on the car and we can compare our car and setup to another car that has the same engine setup with a different turbocharger. So let's see what else we can compare to in the Garrett range. A quick look at the GTX4709 is that the G45 can flow just as much on the turbine side using a smaller wheel. Proof that the new aerodynamics is more efficient. Looking at the compressor side, it is obviously larger, so it's rated to 1625 horsepower in the 80mm trim. Now, the one thing that everyone can take away from this video is that the flow of the turbine wheel is as important, if not more important, than the size of the flow of the compressor wheel. Basically, if your turbine wheel isn't big enough or doesn't flow enough, it's going to choke the engine before you even max out your compressor. Now, in the real world, the only way to find out what's really going on with your turbocharger is to have a speed sensor inside the compressor housing and to have an EGT and back pressure sensors on your exhaust manifold so you can truly monitor what is happening. Now, all up, the G45 looks super impressive on paper, and we can't wait to fit it to our R32 GTR and see what it can do in the real world. So make sure you subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on all the testing and development we're going to have happening with the G45 in the future.